That is, for our purposes, the gist of meditation 4, that Descartes formulates the clear and distinct perception rule that's going to be important in our investigation into his view about the nature of the mind and its relation to the body. Now we can do a very quick tour through meditation 5. For our purposes, meditation 5 is just a different form of a theistic argument. There, Descartes gives his own version of an ontological argument, which for our purposes is a bit redundant. We already take Descartes to have established that the GCB exists. So for your purposes, breeze through, scan, skim, whatever, meditation 5. You don't have to worry about the details there. What matters is what happens as we get into meditation 6, because at that time, Descartes now takes seriously the question what a mind is. And let's just back up from Descartes' own text for a moment and ask ourselves that question, precisely what it is for a thing to be mind, or for an individual, an entity to have a mind. Here's one way of putting the question. Could thinking, feeling, sensing, and such, what seem like mental phenomena, be purely material processes, like, for example, metabolizing, digesting, or sweating? That is, do you want to suppose that thinking about the Eiffel Tower, having a thought about your grandmother, wondering what time it is, making a plan as to what to do with friends, these are all mental activities? Do you want to suggest that those are all physiological processes happening inside of your central nervous system, in the way in which metabolizing is a process that happens inside of your gut, so or at least starts in your gut, digesting is something that happens in your gut, sweating is something that happens in your skin? If you want to say, no, thinking is somehow above and beyond all the physical things that happen in and around my body, if that's your position, and many people have found that position attractive, then you might ask, well, how then do mental phenomena interact with physical phenomena? Because it sure seems like thoughts that I have, plans that I formulate, questions that are in my mind can bring about physical changes. On the other hand, if you want to say, yes, mental phenomena, thinking, sensing, feeling, planning, wondering, are physical phenomena, just things that are capable of being discerned through the lens of neuroscience, for example, then we might ask, in that case, can we make sense of the possibility of the destruction of your body being one that's followed by your continuing to exist? That is, many people take seriously at least the possibility, even if they're not theists, the possibility that they might survive the destruction of their body and perhaps go to heaven, go to hell, be in limbo, something. But if that's the case, how could a purely physical system, when it's destroyed, for example, perhaps your body is incinerated, perhaps you are burned into ashes after your body ceases to function. If you want to suggest that even then there could be a self, an I, that continues to exist, it's not clear how that's possible on the sort of materialistic view of the relationship between mind and body. Descartes wants to address this very question, and he's going to defend a certain position about the relationship between mind and body. And to understand that, I want to start out with what he thinks of as an axiom of identity known as the indiscernibility of identicals. The indiscernibility of identicals says this: if X and Y, for any entities X and Y, perhaps Superman and Clark Kent, perhaps the morning star and the evening star, perhaps Mark Twain and Sam Clemens, X and Y, if they're identical, then any property or feature or characteristic that one has, the other one has as well, and vice versa. So if Mark Twain has a certain property of, for example, having a certain mass or location in space-time, age, etc., then so does Sam Clemens, and vice versa. For any X and Y that refer to the same entity, if X has a property, then Y has a property too. I'm being a little bit sloppy with what philosophers will call the relationship between usage and mention. For our purposes, I don't think we have to worry about those details here. All right, so we have an axiom of identity. And now I also want to help you to give as background the idea of what's known as a modal property. A property, a broader notion, is just anything that characterizes you. Having a certain mass, having a certain location, being tired, being happy, wondering about when lunch is going to be, etc. Those are all properties, things that are characteristics that you possess. Whereas a modal property is something that pertains to things that you are capable of doing. So, for example, you are perhaps capable of running an 8-minute mile. You've got the modal property of being capable of running an 8-minute mile. That doesn't mean you're doing so right now. You might be sitting comfortably, I hope you are, sitting comfortably somewhere watching this lecture, but if you have that modal property, that means that if you choose to run at a good speed, under right conditions, good weather, etc., no huge obstructions or injuries, then you will be able to run a mile in 8 minutes or fewer. That's a modal property. Just as being capable of eating 5 pizzas in 1 hour. I don't have that modal property, but many of you probably do. Salt has the following modal property of being soluble in an unsaturated fluid. Gasoline has the modal property of being likely to combust when being touched by a match, for example. So many of the things around us have not just properties, but this special kind of properties known as modal properties, which have to do with what they're capable of doing. I'm sure you can think of many more examples than that. So these modal properties are characteristics of what a thing is capable of doing. And now I want you to consider the following modal property that many people take themselves to have. Even if you're not a theist, even if you don't believe in a GCB, you could be agnostic, you might even be an atheist, you might still acknowledge that there's still a possibility that you could, when your body's destroyed, that you, this very self that is you, could survive that event, could continue to exist, perhaps presumably disembodied, after the destruction of your body. So the idea is that if you accept that premise, then you accept a premise concerning a modal property. That modal property is one by virtue of which we can say you have the capacity to survive the destruction of your body, or to put it synchronously, you have the modal property of being capable of existing without your body. So to put it in Descartes' terms, Descartes would put it as follows. I clearly and distinctly perceive the possibility of my existing without my body. I think through a scenario in which I exist but my body is nowhere. And Descartes says there doesn't seem to be any contradiction there. There doesn't seem to be any incoherence in the idea of there being a self that exists even if I don't have a body anymore. And now, according to the clear and distinct perception rule rather, Descartes infers I could therefore exist without my body. My mind thus has the property, or this very self has the property of being capable of existing without my body. That is, as you now know, a modal property. That's premise 3. But premise 4, my body does not have the property of existing of being capable of existing without my body. My body does not have the modal property of being capable of existing disembodied. If something were disembodied, it couldn't be my body, this very body. Therefore, Descartes infers, my mind and body are distinct. The reason is that if they were identical, they would have to have all the same properties by virtue of the identity of the indiscernibility of identicals. But they don't have all the same properties. My mind has a property that my body does not have. Which property? The modal property of being capable of existing disembodied. Therefore, they can't be the same thing. This is known as the body detachment argument. You see it on page 51 of the Meditations, and Descartes uses that as a very powerful line of reasoning, purporting to establish the conclusion that my mind and body are distinct, and notice that that can generalize in a very powerful way to get you to see that, okay, my mind is distinct from my body, and indeed any physical thing that is connected with, part of, or otherwise associated with my body, including my central nervous system. So this is a different point from the one that we're making when we talk about Zeke removing your brain from your cranium and letting it float in a vat of fluid during which he stimulates your brain with impulses. This is different. This is supposed to be the idea that my mind could exist in a way that is distinct from any physical object at all, including my central nervous system. And Descartes' idea is, given that it could exist distinct from any such thing, it therefore must in fact exist distinct from any such thing, for the reason that, just by virtue of being capable of so existing, it has different properties from any physical thing, and therefore is distinct from any physical thing. So that is one powerful argument in favor of Descartes' conclusion that mind is distinct from body, and not just your whole body, but also even your central nervous system. Notice also that Descartes will say, and this is something that we often need to be clear about in explaining Descartes' position, it's not right to characterize Descartes' position as just saying mind and body are distinct, because after all, my left hand and right hand are distinct. Descartes' position is more dramatic. It's that my mind is distinct from any physical thing. My left hand is identical with perhaps a collection of skin and bone and blood and cartilage and so on. It's identical with some physical things, whereas for Descartes, if his body detachment argument is right, then it's distinct from, the mind is distinct from any physical thing whatsoever.